For 11 months now, Israel and Hezbollah have been locked in an escalating war of attrition that many had warned could one day lead to all-out conflict. Maybe this was the day. The Israelis have been pounding targets. The IDF says it has hit around 1,100 Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley and in Deraa in South Beirut. More than 350 people were killed and more than 1,000 injured in the bombardment. Dozens of rockets were also fired the other way into northern Israel, which suggests Hezbollah will continue to resist. The Pentagon says it is sending a small number of additional US troops to the Middle East amid the growing crisis. We are expecting in the next few minutes a statement from the Israeli army spokesman Daniel Hagari. But before that, from Beirut, here's our senior international correspondent, Orla Guerin.
Southern Lebanon awoke to this. It looks like all-out war. The Israeli army said it hit 800 sites linked to Hezbollah. It issued Gaza-style warnings, telling residents to go, but they had little time to act.
We ask residents of Lebanese villages to pay attention to the message and warning published by the IDF and heed them. This is an advance warning for your own safety and the safety of your family.
But where to find safety in the middle of all this? And on the roads from the south, a mass exodus. Ahmed says everyone fled his village because of airstrikes and destruction. There's no one left, he says. We took our belongings and went. So many new homeless now in this expanding war. In Beirut too, fear on the streets and a rush to get home. Are you feeling afraid? Sure, Mohammed tells me. I'm afraid for myself, my wife, and my 5 children. I don't know what to do. How long will we be living through this? We can't keep going. Parents were summoned to schools to pick up their children early. There were threats by phone, he says, that they'll hit Beirut. Some in the capital have been getting recorded messages telling them to leave. That includes Lebanon's information ministry. For months there have been fears of a wider war. Now the waiting is over. It's here. Israel's escalation is a huge risk, and not just for Lebanon, but for the whole Middle East. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Beirut.
Let me just show you the live pictures from Jerusalem. We are watching the podium where Daniel Hagari, the spokesman, it's actually in Tel Aviv, I'm being told, where he will speak in the next few minutes. This is going to be in English, so we'll get an update from the government as to their strategy, which we are going to talk about in the company of our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's with me here in the studio. Also joining us from Dubai, Greg Karlstrom, who is the Middle East correspondent for The Economist. Let's just start with you, Lise, if I could, on the balance of things where we are tonight. What do you think? Where would you put things tonight?
Well, I think it's hard to describe a balance. It has been a very deadly day, unprecedented numbers. Israel saying it hit more than 800 targets. That's the highest of any day since October the 8th, when this tit-for-tat began across the Lebanon-Israel border. And Hezbollah fired a record number of missiles into northern Israel, 165, and I'm sure the numbers are going to continue to go up. Unprecedented numbers of casualties, too, on the Lebanese side. It's Prime Minister Netanyahu who used the word balance. They want to change the balance of forces in the north. There were statements today saying we are destroying what Hezbollah has built up over the past 2 decades. So we're waiting for this statement. It's clear this is not going to be the end of this. This is the beginning. And of course, with this ratcheting up, more stairs up the escalatory ladder, the question as always is what can bring them down the ladder? and are they going to keep going up?
Greg, I want to understand what the strategy is here on in. Let's start with Hezbollah. What was Hassan Nasrallah's strategy after October the 7th, and has it worked? Where do they find themselves tonight, having dragged Lebanon into another war?
His strategy after October 7th was to launch what he calls a support front in solidarity with Hamas in Gaza. And the idea was to tie down a percentage of Israel's troops along the northern border and to put military pressure on Israel that might eventually compel it into ending the war in Gaza, reaching a ceasefire with Hamas. It hasn't been successful at doing that. It has depopulated the north of Israel. Some 60,000 people have fled their homes and haven't been able to go back for almost a year. But the military pressure that Hezbollah has put on Israel has not compelled it to end the war in Gaza. That war is still going almost a year later. And I don't think that's a scenario that Hassan Nasrallah anticipated when he started this a year ago. And so now he finds himself in a position where his choices are either to end this show of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, stop firing at Israel. That would be a humiliation for him and a humiliation for Iran and Iran's other proxies in the region, or continue fighting as he has done, but then risk this ever greater escalation in the fight with Israel.
And what about Israel, Lise? Separate to the strategy in Gaza, their idea was to push Hezbollah beyond the Litani River according to Resolution 1701, which was tied up after the 2006 war that we both covered. Was that ever likely to be achievable without the kind of war we're now staring at?
You know, I went back and looked at what were the aims of the 1996 war. I was based in the region then, and the 2006 war that we both saw in Israel and in Lebanon. The aims are the same this time, that they want to degrade, to stop Hezbollah's ability to fire rockets into Israel, as you say, to push them north of the Litani River, in other words, further away from the Israel-Lebanon border. And in this case, they want to allow some 60,000 Israelis who were taken out of their homes under Hezbollah fire last October, allow them to return to their homes. These new war aims were suddenly added to the other war aims for Gaza. It wasn't clear why they were added then, but now it's clear that what has been called from the beginning of the Gaza war, the second front, is now the hottest one, even though the fighting is still continuing in Gaza today. And of course, no sign of that elusive ceasefire, which would end the suffering of Gazans and bring Israeli hostages home.
But as Lise suggests, Greg, there is precedent, plenty of precedent. If you want to go back in history, they tried to create this buffer zone after the war in '82. That Israeli presence up to the Litani River was there, I think, for 16 years. And when they withdrew, the rockets were coming over the top and Israelis were being killed. So is there any suggestion that this would be any different?
No, and that is why Hezbollah came to exist in the first place, was that 18-year occupation by Israel of South Lebanon. Hezbollah came up as a group that was fighting against that Israeli occupation, and that won it a fair amount of support, not just from its Shia constituency in Lebanon, but from a broader cross-section of Lebanese. So I think 2.5 decades later, there is no reason to think that an Israeli occupation of South Lebanon would end any differently. And it would come at a time when Hezbollah has bled a lot of its support inside of Lebanon. There are many people who are angry at its decision to get involved in this war on behalf of Hamas, to bring war to Lebanon. That anger is growing in recent days after the pager and walkie-talkie attacks, and then this very heavy series of airstrikes over the past couple of days. There are a lot of people in Lebanon who are furious with the group because it has embarked on a war that it doesn't seem to have any way to win. It doesn't seem to have any way to get out of. The one thing that might help it regain some popularity in Lebanon and regain a sort of reason for being would be an Israeli ground invasion of Lebanon that would allow Hezbollah once again to say that it is a resistance movement fighting against an Israeli occupation of Lebanese land. So I think to do it again, having not learned the lessons of the last 18-year experience occupying South Lebanon, would be the height of folly.